Hey, welcome to Command HQ. I'm Brock Perdine, as always. Huge story. This is a New York Post article up about an Iranian drone, quote, attack hit chemical tanker in Indian Ocean. And if you read this article, and I'll read the first paragraph or two, you'll understand that I think I haven't done a deep dive on exactly the underlying basis here, but you just feel like we're getting closer and closer to World War III, especially with a weak president who is unwilling to confront the Houthi rebels that are firing these drones, as well as the Iranian drones that are now being used against these oil tankers that are crossing through the Middle East, the Suez Canal over there, and trying to take advantage of Joe Biden's mental state. So let's read the first paragraph or two. A drone launched from Iran struck a chemical tanker in the Indian Ocean early on Saturday. The U.S. Department of Defense said, quote, the motor vessel Chem Pluto, a Liberia-flagged Japanese-owned and Netherlands-operated chemical tanker, was struck at approximately 10 a.m. local time, 6 a.m. GMT, today in the Indian Ocean, 200 nautical miles from the coast of India, by a one-way attack drone fired from Iran, Pentagon spokesperson told Reuters. Now, I don't trust the Pentagon, and this is the first time I read this article. I don't know if that's true or not. That's my first instinct. This could be a false flag situation. You never know. However, the Pentagon, right before these confrontations and or right after, seems like a lot of what they've said has been at least 50% accurate. For example, when they said that Russia was about to invade Ukraine, when everybody said that they weren't. Okay. The incident highlights escalating regional tensions and new risks to shipping lanes after the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. The Iranian government, as well as allied militant forces in Yemen, have publicly criticized the Israeli government's military operation in Gaza. Wonder, let's see this, play this. From the Indian Coast Guard. You don't see any smoke coming from this ship. All right, so what is the extent of the damage? That's my main question right now. Let's read on. Yeah, everybody knows about the Israeli-Gaza situation. The Pentagon statement said that this was the 7th Iranian attack on commercial shipping since 2021. Okay, here we go. There were no casualties as a result of the attack, and a brief fire on board the tanker was extinguished. The incident took place only 200 nautical miles from the coast of India. A spokesperson spokesperson for the Iranian delegation at the United Nations, did not immediately respond to her request for comment. Boy, I'm kind of surprised that India isn't pissed here. If you go over and look at the Canadian prepper, his most recent video is about a major crisis is coming. So every single video he has, he's trying to talk about and exaggerate these events. So, but he hasn't weighed in on this tanker attack. But I did want to play this. The headline here is alert, major crisis is coming, a secret war is being fought. The World Economic Forum is preparing for a 2024 cyber war.
That we don't even know anything about. It's the asymmetric nature of cyber warfare that makes it so dangerous. And what's really scary about this is they don't have to be a Russia level. They don't have to be a China level. What makes cybersecurity and hacking so scary is it's really limited only by your imagination. An attack on the civilian infrastructure, no doubt, will have an impact on any infrastructure that is dependent on it. The most dangerous part is during the crisis, because that's where panic, shock, chaos is at its highest. My biggest fear is not that the internet will be down. My biggest fear is that the internet will be up, but controlled by the adversary. The chaos that will ensue is unfathomable.
I'm hearing a lot of talk about the internet going down, not just from the Canadian prepper, but I'm seeing it all over the internet.
Adversaries have hidden probably Trojans on each other's system, and they're waiting for some sort of a day where they could leverage these assets in a nefarious way. The moment you normalize the use of these non-conventional assets, the world will never be the same. You've just opened Pandora's box. We already have the Trojan horses on our shore. With the advent of AI and quantum computing, it's absolutely terrifying. AI will hack us in a way.
I don't think quantum computing will play any serious role in this
that we could never, ever imagine.
I just wanted to ask you, because you brought up the idea of hardware. And is it possible that these Trojan horses, this dormant hardware, firmware that is just waiting for the command to either like self-destruct or create chaos, or like, is there some dormant malware on here that's just waiting for World War III to start, that it's going to start doing?
No, there isn't.
Crazy shit.
Well, listen, like I said, in cybersecurity, it's hard to give absolutes on certain.
I'm trying to find out if I've ever heard this person before who's being anonymized by Canadian prepper.
Things. I could say that the capabilities are there.
Mm-hmm.
The capabilities are there. And you don't have to have it dormant. You
can tell he's Canadian.
Access it at a later point and download it at certain. One of the best cybersecurity organizations on the planet is in Canada. It's actually called the Citizens Lab at University of Toronto. Phenomenal people. They do great work supporting human rights activists, supporting all sort of groups that do their.
So just
and of course now that
to help people understand 0 day, it's
sure.
a vulnerable.
Okay, so they're talking about malware, potential attack vectors, surface areas of attack, yada, yada, yada. That's not really that important. I think the more important question is like where, like what kind of critical infrastructure are we talking about?
They're uncharted territory. I mean, we have not been able to really fully appreciate their power. And that's why
And, so I guess he's talking about the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and the power that they have over the corporate bureaucracy that now regulates the internet, maintains the internet. All of the critical components of the internet are effectively managed by WEF guided companies.
Operative word is resilience.
That's true. I constantly hear resilience. And so, it's sort of expected that there's going to be a major attack on the internet infrastructure. It's just a matter of when, and how you're resilient in the wake of that potential attack.
Because for people that are interested in security and securing themselves and securing their family and loved.
So I guess my point here is we see all these attacks through drones, which is basically a form of remote warfare, right? Using the SpaceX satellites, right? And using satellite internet. And that could easily be a vector or a reason that the World Economic Forum and the corporations that they manage, as well as the governments that have full authority over the internet and its associated infrastructure, could come up with a reason to turn off the internet. They could say that these drone strikes are getting out of hand and that you have to have an internet ID to get back on the internet.
Once. The only thing you could do about this is you have to adopt your own personal security hygiene. You have to improve your own security. You have to provide redundancy.
I don't think that's true at all. So I'm analyzing the words from this anonymous source that Canadian Prepper is using here. And you can work on your, quote, personal security by hardening your passwords all day, and it's not going to make any sort of impact on this whatsoever. I mean, maybe if you have a ton of money in one account, you want to protect that one account. But beyond that, I don't really know how that would have any major part in improving your outcome when a lot of this critical infrastructure starts to go down.
See, give an example, personal example, right? So you have GPS. I don't have GPS in my cars because I make sure these cars don't have any of these funny things in them. I don't have a Tesla.
So you can tell he's a little paranoid, right? Like he doesn't even want to use GPS in his vehicle. And then he starts to laugh. So what is his reason for doing this? He wants personal recognition. He wants attention.
Just to interrupt you there for a second, people should know you're a prepper with a bunker for a reason.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, there's a very good reason. The more you know,
he's kind of French too. Canadian French, maybe?
The scarier sometimes it gets. Really, it becomes a little sometimes too stressful. But when you have a car, let's say, for example, you're dependent on GPS. Assume what if GPS doesn't work? Well, in the car, you have to have a redundancy, meaning you have to have, let's say, a satellite communicator. Well, let's say that's not working either. Then, well, you have to have maps, detailed maps. You have to have...
That's a good idea.
A magnifying glass with light, so it could operate at night, for example, and you have it in a waterproof pouch, and you have it in your car. So you don't panic that you don't know how to get home. And of course, a compass. Forgot compass. So all that will be one package in your glove compartment, as an example, right? So I'm somewhere, all of a sudden, all the electronics freaked out, nothing is working. Okay, fine. I know how to get myself back home. That's just one example where basically, if you would have an analog or a physical redundancy for everything that you do electronically, you will not feel as stressed. And you have to rehearse that with your loved ones. You have to rehearse that with your community. So the effect will be felt. The only question is going to vary, of course, from one area to another, from one site to another. If you're a site in the middle of Idaho or Montana or one of these big states versus if you're in a very heavily congested, populated area, that'll be much more difficult. But it's something that needs to be completely taken into account. And that's one of the things I bring back to prepping. I don't want to quote one of our favorites, Gerald Celente, and a getaway plan, right? So you have to have sort of a plan of if the highways are clogged, which is a very good bet that they would be, what's your alternative plan to get where you want to go without you?
Okay, he is meandering into these other areas, which anybody could talk about. He's not an expert on these issues. He said that there's a secret war being fought and that the World Economic Forum is preparing for a 2024 cyber war. That's what I want to hear from this anonymous source. And I'm sure that he does have decent information somewhere in here, but he keeps on getting off
And
topic.
this is something to all the crypto bros, as you would call them.
Okay, now he's getting into crypto.
Remember, your cyber wallet is nothing but one system element or one artifact in an ecology. And if the ecology is dead, that wallet, is a heap of junk.
Yeah, that's
not focused at all.
really fascinating.
Cybersecurity companies, and they start running all sort of forensic analysis. Anyway, so this kid, and that's what he was. He's a kid. He went to the cookie jar one too many times, and one sophisticated or high on the totem pole type of hack that is considered for the brag.
Okay, so he's missing the point here because it's not going to be really, in my view, an external hack that has any sort of impact on taking the internet down or even the grid down. It's going to be insiders, okay? It's going to be these corporations that are managing the internet itself. It's going to be done probably in collaboration or in concert with government actors. And that's the whole point here. And then they're going to try and shift blame so no one really knows that it's them. And they're going to shift blame onto, a hack or some political group that they don't like. They're going to find a scapegoat. That's how these things always go down. And he continues to talk about, an attack. The only attack I think that they would use as the underlying basis for this actually happening would be that, like we continue to have these drone strikes in the Middle East and they need to turn off the SpaceX internet, or misinformation or disinformation on the internet. People continue to post disinformation, and then therefore they have a valid reason to selectively turn the internet off depending on who they want to let on the internet, who they want to kick off the internet, and then they want to be able to trace and surveil everything you do. So everything I do on the internet, at least for the past 10 years, has basically been surveilled, tracked. I assume that any communication that I have is going to be monitored, even encrypted communication. And so I have come to accept that to some degree because we live in a world where we have to have some level of convenience. And in my field, technically, I work purely in information technology. I'm a developer. And it would be very difficult to not use the breadbasket of technologies that are afforded to us, whether that's email, GPS, Microsoft Teams, Slack, general messaging applications. And so, people say, well, that's great to have hard paper maps in your vehicle in a waterproof container. That's all well and good. But that helps you in the event that something serious happens. What about the everyday stuff? You can't trade off living in our modern society, especially if you have a position in corporate America, even if you're a business analyst. You still have to use this breadbasket of technologies. And so whatever he's talking about here, A, is not focused. He continues to get sidetracked. I want to know more about the specifics of the internal, God forbid, vectors of attack or the surface areas associated that he knows about. Let's continue.
Bragging rights. It's something that any number of entities could have performed, and it's obviously somebody who's an adversary to Iran. I mean, to create some sort of instability there. Cyber weapons, I will almost venture to say that there is a real cyber war that is happening behind the scenes.
That's a really important statement that he just made around the 54-minute timestamp. He said he would venture to say that there's an actual and a real cyber war going on right now. I 100%, I 1,000% agree with that. And I agree with that based on my personal experience.
Scenes that we don't even know anything about.
And not my personal experience on the internet, my personal professional experience.
And in our past conversations, you and I told you, I'm always more worried about.
And by the way, nothing to do with the legal system in terms of criticizing attorneys. Nothing in that regard. I'm talking about purely professional.
The hacks that are not reported versus the hacks that are reported. Because
I would say that every single day that I'm alive, probably every hour, I have some level of serious concern and even at times a little bit of panic regarding what's going on with respect to what he just said, which is the fact that we have some very serious brewing conflicts going on the internet, and critical infrastructure is at risk. Again, God forbid anything like that were to ever happen, and there are systems set up to be resilient. But, you know, I hear Alex Jones, for example, talk about this, and he's been harping on this for years. And he talks about the pure physical grid. But there are a lot of other very delicate, abstract components that no one knows about. And no one can really even speak about because they're afraid of being arrested if they do. There's a whistleblower protection clause that came out, I think, like 5 or 10 years ago from Chuck Grassley. It's called like the grid operator whistleblower clause, but it only protects you if you whistleblow on a corporation. And it's not like a full-blown protection whatsoever because, unfortunately, CISA, bring up the government agency CISA, which everybody believes now is involved in censorship, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. A lot of this infrastructure is actually managed by CISA, or it's regulated by CISA. When I say managed, what I really mean is regulated by CISA, more or less. And so it's not very clear on whether or not some of these whistleblower protections would afford you any sort of shield against CISA coming after you. And CISA has gotten a bad rap recently because of its involvement in censorship. And I've read a lot about this. Michael Schellenberger, for example, and Matt Taibbi, talking about how CISA was involved with Twitter, with Facebook, mostly Twitter because Elon Musk released all those Twitter files. But they're missing the point of CISA. The only reason CISA had that level of power to censor information, especially on Twitter, and this is something that I'm involved with on multiple levels, right? Because as a public citizen, I'm constantly attacked for posting things on the internet, as well as it relates to CISA itself. CISA has this power because it regulates the critical infrastructure and effectively manages some of the policies that the teams embedded in these companies involved with cybersecurity have to report to. So CISA basically knows more than any other government agency when it comes to these corporations. And that's the reason it had such strong censorship power. It wasn't really a censorship agency, but it was manipulated because of the fact that it does regulate all this stuff. But if we're just talking about protecting the critical infrastructure on the internet and CISA and stuff,
hacks that are not reported are the.
You talk about anonymous sources like this. I'm not sure if his voice has been anonymized. It sounds like it may be slightly altered. You could tell he's Canadian and likely French Canadian.
The ones where the 0 days are being used. And most of the hacks, I mean, once you hack a system and you get a hold of it, let's say somebody wants to, and I'm not going to mention countries, but let's say country A wants to really stick it to country B. Once you hack their systems, the smartest thing to do is just to be a persistent threat quietly. You just stay there and you're just collecting as much data.
Having a passive backdoor where you're, excuse me, sifting through logs, looking at requests. If you get access to a Splunk or similar system, you're pretty much golden.
As possible. And you're setting up for the day where you might launch an attack or whatever, but a cyber espionage is so much more valuable than a cyber attack because information is so valuable. So these hacks, you never.
Well, again, this kind of relates to the one-off cyber hack.
Technologies are becoming more ubiquitous. They're becoming cheaper. They're becoming easier. During the Cold War, at what point the balance.
Okay, I think that he should have likely used an outline when he was giving this interview, and I think the Canadian prepper should have stepped in and stopped him in multiple places during this interview.
Weather and the range it's going to have, and how
Because
all vehicles are now commandeered under this the power of eminent domain.
Because I am not seeing a very focused presentation here, and I don't think the Canadian prepper has enough wherewithal to make sure that he remains focused. I mean, everybody knows the information that he's providing, but it is true. And if I were to re-give this interview in a matter of 2 or 5 minutes, I would say that you really have to look at the layers of critical infrastructure and find out where those are, who manages them, and then if you want to look at some of the World Economic Forum white papers and map the overall policy to how it's being actually implemented by some of these corporations, you could then have a better understanding, I think, of what the internal strategy is to use some sort of false flag to bring in this level of control over, the Western population and eventually the world population. And I think the reason that they're trying to capture the Western population, first, I'm speculating here, is that the third world will quickly follow if the first world, the Western world, Western Europe, parts of Russia. Russia's the first world, I'm not saying it isn't. And then, the United States and Canada. Because once those citizens are effectively given this soft fence to fence them in on the internet, after we've now shifted a lot of our economy and a lot of our work life to the internet, it's game over.
In terms of how a cyber attack would take place, I think remember, there was an assumption there. The assumption there was the cyber attack there wanted a particular.
They're going to look for an opportunity. They're going to look for something like this Iranian drone attack on these tankers that are operating in the Middle East. And they're going to say that these rebel groups who are using these remote drones, we have to turn the internet off in order to establish that level of control to stop these these constant little conflicts that start to brew.
Type of outcome, which is complete chaos. I'm afraid that aspect was accurate, if not even watered down a little bit. And let me explain why. When talking about business continuity, disaster recovery, when you're talking about prepping, I always break timelines into three components: the pre-crisis, the during the crisis, and the post-crisis.
Okay, so he's meandering again. He started talking about what he knows about what kind of attacks would bring in something like this, and then he talks about how to prepare for it. So you can tell he's not giving very clear answers whatsoever.
The most dangerous part is the during the crisis, because that's where panic,
Duh.
shock, chaos is at its highest. I think the way they presented, and this is why I said it was like PG-13 version of what happened, is you don't need to have these flyers distributed. You could almost have an AI software that could custom build a decisive message and send it to each audience in opposites based on their profile. So if somebody likes vanilla and they get aggravated by chocolate or strawberry, well, you go ahead and you send them a strawberry message, and vice versa. So AI could take your profile based on huge database mining.
He said that AI could take your profile and send out a custom message depending on who you are based on some profile. Again, these are all theoreticals. He's not giving hard actual evidence to the audience here. You don't know. Of course, AI could do that. Everybody knows that. Again, it's very obvious. But there are also AI systems that can maintain the resiliency of the internet given anything like this were to ever happen, God forbid.
Right? Big sets of data.
So it's kind of all how you use these technologies in concert with one another.
And weaponize that information to create a custom message. Now, in the movie, they were talking about flyers that were in various languages on the East.
And again, I want to close the stream out. It's getting a little long here. By talking about ARPANET and Leonard Kleinrock, packet switching, and some of the early dissertations that came out in the 60s and early 70s regarding the reasoning behind the internet as we know it today. And packet switching, which is a redundant and resilient form of messaging over the internet, that was the kind of functional protocol that ARPANET uses. ARPANET was a tri-node connection between, I think, originally 3 military bases, and then they wanted to commercialize it to some extent, so they made it more of an academic project, and that's when it came into UCLA, and they tried to connect up, I think, Berkeley and UCLA. The decentralized nature of packet switching was the strategy to defend against any sort of nuclear attack on this country. The more decentralized the nodes were, the more resilient the entire system could potentially be. And so overall, the overarching strategy always has to be resiliency, redundancy, making sure that there's some firewall at least to protect against a more global contagion on the internet, that if a small portion of the internet is turned off, that you have other nodes and other infrastructure ready to go to take that load. And for the most part, we do have that. And that's another reason why the internet has been successful. But the power grid itself doesn't quite have that, as everybody knows. And because our internet is now so closely tied to the power grid, to the point that even these power plants were putting data centers really either next to or on top of, layering them together with power plants or near facilities where energy is readily available. They're becoming so wired together that if one goes down, potentially the other one would go down, because even the power plant relies to some level on the internet being up to do certain things, to turn certain things on. Some devices need to be turned on, some devices need to be turned off, or to get status reporting on them. All right, so I think that the Canadian prepper is vaguely on the right track. I just wish that he'd get a little more focused here. Maybe he can take a few pieces out of here and make a better video. All right, I'll be back later tonight. Let me just check to see if there's any comments. Nope. All right, have a good Christmas, everyone, and I will try and be back later tonight, probably really late. Bye.
Thanks for watching Command HQ with Brock and Agent X. We'll see you next time.